But the Letitia Stout case, you kind of needed to follow the entire case because by the time you got to Dr. Lewis, you're just like, what? IG's Instagram. All right, y'all. Sorry. Short break for you guys. And I think it might be the state's turn. Okay, defense rest. I think the state's going to go. And I think the state, I wonder who they're going to call. They keep bringing up Dr. Seipel. So I think that's the one that was hired by the state court to evaluate her. Let's see why he did administer the MMPI.
Mr. Lizet or Mr. Saunders, who's going to be questioning the first witness? So, Mr. Lizet, your first witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Dr. Matthew Seipel. Doctor, when you were reviewing the records and ultimately when you had to come to an opinion in this case, had you encountered prior diagnoses that had been assigned to Ms. Schabusiness at various points in time?
Yes.
Were you aware that at some point in time she had received a bipolar diagnosis?
Yes.
And do you recall where that came from?
That was during her inpatient treatment at the Nicolay Psychiatric Center in 2021.
And Doctor, what did you note with respect to that particular diagnosis? Were there any concerns when you saw that?
Yes, a concern I had with that diagnosis is that for one to be diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and specifically within the diagnostic criteria for that condition, that the symptoms cannot occur exclusively in the course of substance intoxication. And I noted that there's multiple collateral sources suggesting that she was abusing methamphetamine very extensively leading up to that treatment episode. So I was unable to really see how the treatment providers could have parsed out to what extent any psychiatric instability derived from the methamphetamine use versus an actual underlying mental illness.
Did you have an opportunity to review the discharge summary from Nicolay Psychiatric?
Yes.
And in that discharge summary, is there a discussion of how she presented upon arrival compared to how she presented upon her release 21 days later?
Yes, it was noted that there was a remarkable difference and that psychotic symptoms were evident upon admission, including hallucinations and very disorganized behavior, although those symptoms were determined to be largely resolved by the end of that treatment episode.
Does that suggest anything to you with respect to the substance abuse that was indicated at the outset?
And so it's, again, difficult to disentangle to what extent that improved mental status resulted from any medication she received in the facility versus her mere enforced abstinence from intoxicants.
Based on your professional education and experience of the types of symptoms that were noted upon arrival at Nicolay Psychiatric, can those symptoms also be associated with the methamphetamine use solely?
Yes.
So it's possible for someone to manifest those symptoms solely based on meth use without having any underlying mental health illness?
Objection
Yes.
calls for speculation. Overruled.
Yes.
You indicated that you had the opportunity to review reports from other evaluators who met with Ms. Schabusiness and provided opinions in this case. Is that correct?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, random. Did you guys watch the new Willy Wonka trailer with Timothée Chalamet? What do you guys think of it?
Did you note whether or not any of the other evaluators shared similar concerns about the bipolar diagnosis assigned to her by Nicolay Psychiatric?
Yes, I noted that in Dr. Angen's mental responsibility evaluation, she took most specific and direct issue with the basis for that diagnosis, and she ultimately, in her report, offered that she did not see sufficient support to assign a diagnosis of bipolar disorder. I also noted that, for example, in Dr. Lucetta's competency report, while she did not necessarily completely rule out bipolar disorder, she also noted again that the substance abuse was a significant factor leading up to that diagnosis, and she merely essentially sought to rule out that diagnosis but did not assign it.
I also want to just sort of speak generally about bipolar. Can you describe for the jury what bipolar is and what is required to diagnose such a disorder?
Yes, and so there are two different types of bipolar disorder.
He
There's
is very
bipolar 1
thorough.
disorder, which is a more severe condition.
Like I would say, like very thorough and very easy to like listen to, not like kind of like confusing and like jumbled, I guess.
And that is the diagnosis that has appeared in some of the records in this case. Bipolar 1 disorder is characterized predominantly by manic episodes, which are periods of it lasting at least a week where more often than not the individual has a significantly elevated mood. They may behave impulsively, erratically, have a decreased need for sleep.
I do wonder though, because like I wonder if he's only going to focus on the bipolar diagnosis that the other doctor thinks that Taylor has. But what are his comments about, like, you know, the stuff that she was experiencing when she was like at a younger age, like, you know, 7 to 14, or when she was like, I don't know, 16, 17 and stuff like that. I wonder what his comments are going to be about for that. Or if he's just going to strictly just like stick to the bipolar thing.
And in some instances with bipolar 1, that is alternated by depressive episodes, which typically last at least 2 weeks and are largely the opposite of mania. That means there's a persistently low mood, low energy, feelings of worthlessness, guilt, or hopelessness, things of that like. Whereas bipolar 2 disorder has hypomanic episodes, which are not as prolonged or severe as a manic episode. And by diagnostic criteria, someone must also experience depression in order to qualify for bipolar 2 disorder.
So is it fair to say that to diagnose someone with bipolar 1, we would have that expectation of seeing those prolonged manic episodes, at least one instance of a prolonged manic episode?
Yes, and it would need to occur outside voluntary substance intoxication.
Is it possible for a person who has been diagnosed with a bipolar disorder, is that the type of condition that could occasionally wax and wane over the course of someone's lifetime?
To the extent that someone does indeed meet diagnostic criteria for bipolar disorder, yes, there certainly can be a waxing or waning or a cyclical pattern of symptoms.
I also want to harken back to the fact that you have done NGI evaluations, is that correct?
Yes.
And is bipolar a condition that can sometimes contribute to an opinion that someone does meet NGI criteria?
Yes, it certainly can.
And under what circumstances might you expect to see that?
Yes, and so in order to reach an opinion of supporting an NGI plea in the context of bipolar disorder, one, there would need to be a firmly established diagnosis of bipolar disorder, again, in the absence of substance intoxication, and there would need to be a very direct linkage between the symptoms of that mental illness at the time of the alleged offenses and the substantial lack of capacity to either appreciate wrongfulness or to conform conduct to the requirements of the law. It's not enough for the defendant to simply be symptomatic, but that linkage needs to be established with the lack of capacity.
When you talk about establishing that linkage between the crimes alleged and the mental illness that's been assigned to an individual, what sorts of facts or circumstances do you consider when you do NGI evaluations?
And so there would need to be converging data sources indicating that indeed the defendant was symptomatic of that legitimate mental illness at the time, and there would need to be, conceptually, it would need to make sense for the alleged misconduct. There would need to be some sort of reason that mania, for instance, would have caused that behavior. There would need to be evidence to suggest that the person was fundamentally unable to control their behavior. And so again, that would typically comprise a pattern that extends beyond that one momentary act, but it would need to be a broader pattern encompassing that time frame.
So if you were evaluating whether someone's bipolar disorder might be causal of the criminal offenses, would it be significant to you to evaluate the defendant's symptoms or how someone presents immediately before and immediately after the alleged offenses?
Yes, those would be critical time frames in which to gather as much data as possible.
Is that because one would expect that someone with bipolar wouldn't manifest those symptoms solely for a short period of time, but typically over a much longer period?
Yes, that is correct.
Objection calls for speculation.
I think it calls for his professional opinion.
Overruled.
Yes, it would be expected to see, again, a symptom duration longer than just the mere moments of committing a criminal offense.
Doctor, I want to quickly return back to some of the other records that had been mentioned. You indicated that you did have an opportunity to review the medical records from Bell & Health from two different stays that Ms. Schabusiness had, one in 2012 and one in 2014.
Yes.
And I'll first call your attention to the 2012 records, if you recall those. Do you remember if Ms. Schabusiness was assigned a diagnosis by the treatment providers at Bell & Health at the outset of her stay in 2012?
She was assigned a diagnosis of mood disorder not otherwise specified.
So she was not assigned a bipolar diagnosis at that time, is that correct?
Correct.
And then in 2014, did she likewise have some sort of diagnosis following her 3-day stay in Bellin?
She was again assigned a diagnosis of mood disorder not otherwise specified, and they did add, which is not a diagnosis per se, but they noted alongside the diagnosis a history of psychosis. But in looking closer at the records, that history of psychosis derives squarely from an adverse medication reaction, which prompted the initial inpatient stay. So she was prescribed sertraline, and then only after that did she begin to have psychotic symptoms. And those.
Okay, so just some notes for the previous lawyer and the psychologist. I know they're not watching my stream right now, but maybe they will in the future. But I think that's what needed to be done. I think that the lawyer needed to kind of like take control of the timeline, and then like he'll answer. So the lawyer takes control and kind of like helps navigate in a very organized manner, and then like psychologist will answer, right? I think what happened with the other one was that the defense lawyer like would ask her a question, and she would just kind of like and just like list out a bunch of stuff, and then like because the timelines were a little bit jumbled for us, we were like pretty confused. We were pretty fucking confused. So I think this is like a really good way of asking your witness questions, because it kind of helps us understand what timeline we're at, and then like we're focusing on one timeline at a time instead of like going back between like 2012 and then saying, oh, 2 years after that, oh, in 2015, and then 5 years after, you know what I mean? Like, or like, I don't know, it was just like all over the place. This is much easier to kind of like digest for us. I like this.
Symptoms resolved as soon as that medication was discontinued.
Again, she was not assigned a bipolar diagnosis in 2014 either.
Correct.
Dr. Seipel, you indicated that you did have an opportunity to review Dr. Litton's report from July 3rd of 2023.
Yes, I did.
And what type of report from a forensic standpoint was Dr. Litton's report?
It appeared to be a combined competency and NGI report.
In your experience and training, is it best practice for someone to engage in a combined report of both competency and NGI?
Typically, a separate report would be submitted to address each issue independently.
What are some of the reasons why you might not combine those two reports?
For one, there can be information introduced in the issue of criminal responsibility that might be inappropriate to be contained within a competency report. A competency report is not supposed to contain incriminating information with regard to the alleged offenses, but also
Is he saying she was being lazy?
from a psychological standpoint, it makes it difficult to parse out which data and which arguments are directed at each respective issue.
He's doing well. They canceled the rest of the tour with the Hollywood Vampires. Really? I didn't hear about that. I saw that he was doing some like artwork stuff, and like he was like thanking Dior for like always like being by his side and shit. But yeah, what's up with JD?
If they're addressed alongside each other in the same report.
Is it particularly concerning if you come to a conclusion that a person is not presently competent, that you would also rely on that information to form an NGI opinion?
I would say that it's not inappropriate if that's a data point that is considered, but that there should not be a strong linkage in that reasoning, as again, it's two different legal issues pertaining to two different time points.
Doctor, when you looked at that report as it relates to NGI and Dr. Litton's report, I'm just going to ask you generally, did you have any concerns with the methodology that was shown in that particular report?
Some are done really well, enjoyed a few, but a lot of them just lazy rehashes. Yeah, remakes are, I don't know, sometimes remakes are really good. Like, I really enjoy them, and sometimes the remakes are just like, ugh. Like, what did I watch recently that was, like, really good? Remake. What's that futuristic one? It has, like, numbers in it. What was it called? Who was in it? Was it Ryan Reynolds? Or the guy that looked like Ryan Reynolds? Oh, Ryan Gosling. Was it Blade Runner? And it had like numbers after it. I don't know. I watched that and I was like, oh, this is really good. I really liked it. Yeah. Sometimes I really like remakes though, because sometimes like nostalgia is really there. But like if it's like a real, like if it's like a live action remake, I'm like, please, no. Yeah, Blade Runner. Yeah, Blade Runner I thought was really good. Or like remake of like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. I like the original and I love the remake with Johnny Depp in it. It's so fucking funny. But yeah. Okay, and I also like the remake of Aladdin. I know a lot of people don't. Okay, and that's kind of like a hot take, but I like the Aladdin remake. I enjoyed it. Sorry, I was gonna go back to, I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts? What's the best remake movie out there, and then what's the worst remake movie? Go.
I found that it seemed appropriate data sources were consulted, at least that's what the methods section suggested in that report, although there was essentially no discussion or review of the discovery materials that were reviewed, and really no account from a defendant's perspective of the alleged misconduct, which are very critical pieces of information that would always be included in an NGI report.
So those pieces of information that you just discussed, like the account of the offense and the specific discovery materials outlining the offense, why is it important to include that type of information in the report?
Because again, the statute for NGI pertains squarely to the moments of the alleged offense, and that is the data that most directly captures those moments. And so it becomes somewhat of a black box issue if those moments are not discussed in the report, and inferences instead are appearing to be made based upon presentation at other time points. That's not sound.
The Parent Trap? Oh no, I love both. I love the original and I love the remake. Oh, I thought they were both so good.
Professional reasoning with regard to the issue of NGI.
And I want to talk about information being based on other time points. Did it appear to you that Dr. Litton relied very strongly on her personal observations of Ms. Schabusiness in the interview?
I would say it seemed that the symptoms that were portrayed during the moments of that interview seemed to weigh heavily, as well as the mere fact of a bipolar diagnosis being assigned roughly a year before the alleged offenses. Right,
because I think when she was 14 years old, I think initially they diagnosed her with bipolar 1. I think that's what she meant to say. But then when she was discharged, they didn't say that she had bipolar 1. So like maybe that's what she meant to say. Like, oh, like they initially thought she had bipolar 1. And then like after when like she was done with the 3 days thing, they're like, oh, actually, no, she doesn't have bipolar 1. So I think that's what she meant to say. Yeah, it seems like the bipolar thing wasn't really mentioned, like solidly mentioned until 2021, but he's saying that like, well, he doesn't understand how they could have said that she has bipolar if at the time, because if you're going to be diagnosed with bipolar, you also have to have that like, I don't know, like I guess episode without like the use of, I have the fucking phrase here. What did he say? long manic episode, but must occur absent of substance and intoxication. So it seems like during that 2021, she was like still on meth and like, I don't know, maybe some other drugs. I don't know. We're just confused. It's okay. We got each other to help clarify. And he's helping us clarify so much. Thank you, Dr. Seipel.
Were you able to determine whether or not Dr. Litton actually assigned a diagnosis herself?
It seemed implicit in the report that she concurred with the bipolar diagnosis, although it was not explicitly stated. For instance, I am assigning the defendant a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Is that typical in your experience to not assign a diagnosis during such an evaluation?
In an NGI evaluation, as the identification of a qualifying mental disease or defect is critical and necessary to support an NGI plea, it would be essential for the diagnosis to be very explicitly indicated.
And that was not done here?
I would say, again, it was not explicit, rather it was more so inferred, being embedded in text.
And Doctor, the report from Dr. Litton, does that include a relatively lengthy or specific discussion of the observations of Dr. Litton from the interview that occurred in June of 2023?
Yes, the greatest details seem to pertain to that which would have been her second contact with the defendant.
Oh, I love the original Total Recall. Did I rewatch the new one? I don't know if I watched the new one or not. It might have sucked. The best remakes when they did Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. Oh God, they're both so good. I don't know. I love the original and Brotherhood.
And you personally had contact with the defendant within about a month of that particular interview. Is that fair?
It would have been roughly like 3 or 4 weeks for my estimation.
The observations that Dr. Litton is making of the defendant, her actions, her behaviors, her psychotic state, did you witness those same things when you met with Ms. Schabusiness?
I did not notice the evident distraction that was evidently apparent during the interview with Dr. Litton. The defendant easily maintained focus and was able to supply coherent, relevant responses to questioning. She remained behaviorally appropriate and was able to engage in detailed discussion of her legal situation. There was a brief moment in which she referenced claiming to see a supposed green train within the room, which is something that was evidently very distracting during the interview with Dr. Litton. I essentially ignored when that symptom was mentioned, and there was no further mention of it thereafter. And
God damn, he's based. I just ignored it.
there was no evidence that she was in any way distracted by that or any similar psychotic symptom.
I actually have no idea what psychologists are supposed to do. Are they supposed to like inquire like, oh, tell me more about the green train, or just ignore like what he did? Jesus. So he met with her in November 2022, I think, and July of 2023. And then the other one that they hired, tried to meet in February, but got chair thrown, refused to come interview, and then June 2023. So, I mean, not too far away from each other.
Did you form a conclusion?
Oh, and for Total Recall, I did watch it, actually. I remember I watched it, and I probably just thought it was like, it was okay. Like, I don't think I had, like, I don't think I had, like, a big impression on it or anything. It was okay.
With respect to the psychotic manifestations that Ms. Schabusiness was outwardly claiming to have?
I found that there was not sufficient support for assigning a diagnosis such as bipolar disorder or schizophrenia that could presumably underlie those symptoms.
Did you have any concerns about the validity of the claimed symptoms?
Yes, I did.
And what were those concerns?
And so my concerns were manifold. There has been a remarkable inconsistency in presentation over the pendency of this case in terms of the symptoms the defendant has claimed to forensic examiners versus to clinical providers within the jail, and even during very similar time frames, she's offered contradictory remarks. And apparently, only during the interview with Dr. Litton has anyone observed her during the pendency of this case to seem to be preoccupied with internal stimuli. That's not something that I have observed, and jail providers have noted that even in the isolated instances where the defendant has endorsed hallucinations, they have viewed no outward indication.
Wait, what? Why are you interrupting?
In the isolated instances where the defendant has endorsed hallucinations, they have viewed no outward indication.
I object only because that calls for hearsay. I apologize, but overruled.
I forgot where you were in your answer, but it's your
another question.
Sure. Had other doctors who evaluated the defendant shared concerns that you reported about the possibility of feigning or embellishing symptoms?
Yes.
And who was that?
I noted that first in Dr. Lucetta's competency report as part of a competency instrument that she administered to the defendant. Embedded within that were validity indices. That means they were testing items which sought to determine the credibility of the defendant's endorsement of psychiatric symptoms.
Oof, and Dr. Lucetta is the one that the defense had originally hired.
Her responses to those items suggested an elevated probability of a non-credible response style with regard to endorsing psychiatric symptoms. And similarly, when Dr. Engen completed her NGI evaluation, she administered the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, or MMPI as it's widely known.
Okay.
And the extent of her invalid responses on that instrument made it where her clinical profile could not be interpreted because her validity skills for that instrument suggested she was grossly exaggerating psychiatric symptoms in a manner that would be extreme and inconsistent even for a patient with legitimate schizophrenia.
And did you note whether or not Dr. Lighton performed any such psychological testing to determine the validity of the symptoms that she was observing from Ms. Schabusiness?
I found no mention of any type of instrument for symptom validity within her report.
Was that surprising to you?
I would say yes, in general, but especially specifically given that those psychotic symptoms really seem to be the crux of her opinion regarding the issues of both competency and criminal responsibility, and especially in light of prior testing data that cast significant doubt over the legitimacy of those symptoms. So under those circumstances, it would be extremely unusual for an examiner to not administer testing.
Now, did you administer testing of Ms. Schabusiness when you met with her?
I was prepared to administer testing upon entering the evaluation, although her clinical presentation suggested such testing would not be necessary to reach an opinion regarding her adjudicative competency.
Can you explain that maybe just in a little more layman's details?
Yes.
Yeah, you're doing layman the entire time.
And so to the extent that the
Break it down.
defendant would have presented similarly as she did with Dr. Lighton, for instance, presenting herself as very distracted by hallucinations, unable to supply linear or coherent responses, then I would have administered psychological testing to see where the validity lied with such symptoms. Although she did not portray those symptoms and with relative ease was able to discuss her legal situation in a rational manner, so the validity of symptoms became a moot point. The results of that testing would have had no influence on my opinion regarding competency.
Essentially, you didn't need to test the validity of the symptoms because you didn't see the symptoms.
Correct.
Okay. Interesting.
Now, Doctor, you also had an opportunity to review the report of Dr. Engen, which I believe you previously mentioned. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, Dr. Engen's report is a report on NGI and not competency. Is that right?
Yes, it is specifically and solely to the issue of NGI.
Now, some of the shortfalls of Dr. Lighton's report that you already pointed out, did you see those same concerns in the report of Dr. Engen?
I did not.
Can you compare or contrast the methodology that Dr. Engen used to the methodology used by Dr. Lighton?
And so in Dr. Engen's report, I found to be consistent with my training, experience, and my understanding of best practice in the field of forensic psychology, and that she engaged in a thorough review and detailed in her report the discovery materials. She supplied a detailed accounting of the defendant's personal account to her of the index offenses. She reviewed medical records from the Nicolay Psychiatric Treatment Center that, again, would have been in that time period leading up to this offense, and she administered psychological testing to aid in determining the validity of any of the psychiatric symptoms that the defendant claimed during the evaluation.
It's also the presentation too, because like the other doctors started off with like, Taylor Schabusiness having, she was having these issues when she was like as young as like 7 to 14. Then she was talking about the teenage years and then slowly building up to like when Taylor Schabusiness committed the crime. And then afterwards, right? He kind of just went for like, he just started like, I think he did a really good job at like attacking the bipolar angle, because he started with the bipolar angle. And then from then on, he worked like his way down to the other dates and kind of explained those. So I think they both did a pretty good job, but he's definitely better understanding because he presents information better. And also the lawyer that's talking to him is also doing a really good job at kind of like guiding where like the timeline is and stuff like that.
And so that represented to me a full and comprehensive NGI evaluation.
And in contrast, did Dr. Engen's report specifically tie Ms. Schabusiness's behavior at and around the time of the offense to any mental illness or lack thereof?
Dr. Engen supplied a detailed articulation of why she ultimately did not assign a qualifying mental disease or defect diagnosis to the defendant, and then she in turn articulated why she did not believe there was any support for the conclusion that outside of voluntary substance intoxication, the defendant would have substantially lacked capacity to appreciate wrongfulness or conform her conduct to the requirements of the law.
I think Dr. Liddon is probably definitely going to come back on the stand. Yeah, she's definitely going to come back for like redirect, I think.
I think we touched on this earlier as it related to general diagnoses of a mental health condition, but can you talk briefly about the impact that acute substance intoxication has on attempting to determine whether or not someone would be NGI?
And so according to the Wisconsin jury instructions, mental disturbance brought on by voluntary substance intoxication is not considered to be a qualifying mental disease or defect. And so to the extent that an examiner cannot rule out the sequelae of that voluntary intoxication as being the primary contributing factor to behavior, then the reason would dictate that an NGI plea cannot be supported.
Thank you, Doctor. No further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
Sequelae, a condition which is a consequence of a previous disease or injury. The long-term sequelae of infection. All right, guys, new word. Sequelae. Very fancy.
Mr. Fraley. Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Seipel, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
You prepared 2 reports concerning Taylor Schabusiness, correct?
Yes.
One in November of 2022 and then one in July of 2023, correct?
Yes.
And you received police reports, correct?
I did not review the police reports.
Did you review the criminal complaint?
Yes.
Did you have a chance to review any video footage from the incident on February 22nd or February 23rd of 2022?
I did not.
In this particular case, did you administer the 2 gold standard tests, the MMPI and the MCMI?
I did not administer either of those instruments.
Yet you criticized Dr. Lighton for not doing it, correct?
Yes.
Now, you've been a licensed psychologist since February of 2022, correct?
Yes.
That's when you obtained your license to practice and do evaluations and reports and all of that, correct?
My license enabled me to practice independently, although I performed all of these evaluations under supervision from September 2020 up until that time.
Okay. In September of 2020, that's when you were a fellow?
That's when I began my postdoctoral fellowship in forensic psychology.
Okay. When you've had a chance to review Dr. Lighton's curriculum vitae, correct?
Yes.
You've had a chance to review her evaluation from July 3rd of 2023, correct?
Damn, he's calling you a noob.
Yes.
As far as experience level, she has more experience than you. Is that fair?
I would say she's been a practicing psychologist longer, although the extent to which she has conducted NGI evaluations, I don't know if she has more experience than me.
Good
You
answer.
understand that she worked at Mendota Mental Health in the past, correct?
Yes, and typically NGI evaluations are not performed for patients already within the State Mental Health Institute.
Okay. And with regards to Dr. Christina Engine, she works in the Wisconsin Forensic Unit as well.
Yes, she is employed by behavioral consultants in the Wisconsin Forensic Unit.
Would she be a colleague or a coworker of yours?
I would say we are similarly employed, although we practice typically in different areas of the state and have pretty minimal contact with each other.
And the two of you are aligned as far as opinions in this particular case. Is that fair?
Well, we opined on different issues, so I would not agree with that statement.
But the ultimate recommendation is the same, correct?
I guess I'm not sure what you're asking, sir.
That you and her both find insufficient evidence to support the special plea, the NGI plea.
I would say I did not offer an opinion with regard to NGI, so again, I can't agree with that statement.
Okay. You've had a chance to review Brown County Jail records, correct?
Yes.
You reviewed Bell and Health records that I sent, correct?
Yes.
You had a chance to review the Nicolay Psychiatric Center records through Brown County, correct?
Yes.
You reviewed a lot of mental health records, correct?
Yes.
Fair to say that Taylor Denise Schabusiness does have a mental health history. Would that be fair?
I would say in general terms, yes, she has had contact with mental health treatment.
And
She's had contact.
fair to say that she was the subject of a civil commitment in 2021, correct?
Yes, it is my understanding that she became subject to a 6-month civil commitment during the course of her inpatient treatment in 2021.
And she was found by a court of law to be mentally ill, at least in 2021. Is that fair?
According to that court order, it would suggest that, yes.
And then she was on a medication order in order to take psychotropic medications for that same period of time, correct?
Yes, it is my understanding she was court ordered to medication compliance.
A lot of different doctors evaluated and took a look at Ms. Schabusiness, correct?
Hey, Snow.
With respect to the pendency of this case or more generally?
Just with respect to the pendency of this case.
Yes, I would say there have been a handful of us that have completed evaluations.
Dr. Deborah Collins? Yes?
Yes.
Dr. Tracy Lucetta?
Yes.
Dr. Diane Lighton?
Yes.
Yourself?
Yes.
Dr. Christina Engine?
Yes.
Seems like all the other doctors were female except for him, maybe. Sorry, someone made a comment about maybe Taylor has problems communicating with other women.
With regards to Ms. Schabusiness's treatment at Nicolay Psychiatric Center, was she diagnosed over there in May of 2021 with bipolar disorder, current episode manic severe with psychotic features?
Yes, that was the diagnosis those providers assigned.
She was prescribed medications, correct?
Yes, I believe it was an antipsychotic medication that was prescribed.
Do you know if that was Aristata?
I would have to consult the records to refresh my memory.
Was it your understanding that she was prescribed a medication that would be by injection?
To the extent that it is Abilify Aristana, yes, that is a long-acting injectable medication.
It's an antipsychotic medication, correct?
Yes, with mood-stabilizing properties as well.
When I hear the word opine, I think of pine cones. So every time I hear that word, I just see like pine cones in my head. Damn pine cones, stepping on them.
And fair to say that through Brown County, through Nicolay, that Ms. Schabusiness was given a diagnosis of bipolar disorder.
Yes.
He says the reason why he didn't administer the MMPI, he said he was planning to when he first met with her, but then he didn't see any of the symptoms, so there's no need to administer the MMPI. That was his reasoning. While the other doctor, well, she got real animated. I think she just got really offended at maybe what she thought the state was implying.
Nicolay for about a month, correct?
I believe it was roughly 3 weeks.
A couple weeks. And then she was discharged?
Yes.
She was discharged, after she had her baby?
What was the question, sir?
I'm sorry.
Wait, so when she was pregnant, you think she was clean? You think she was doing drugs when she was pregnant? She probably was doing drugs, right? I wonder how her kid is. Is she on meds now? The other doctor mentioned that she's like prescribed, what's it called, olazapine, but she wasn't compliant. So meaning like she's like maybe taking it sometimes or maybe just not really taking it at all.
Do you know if she was discharged after she had her baby?
I do not believe she gave birth during the course of that hospitalization.
Subsequent to that, she gave birth, correct?
I would again have to consult the records for the dates on that.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got like calculated responses, but I think he's just like naturally that way. Damn. Wish I can be like that.
When you looked at all these records, did you come to find that there were some references to Ms. Schabusiness suffering from paranoia?
That word was mentioned in the records on some occasions, yes.
And was it mentioned that she had experienced some delusional thoughts?
Again, that was a word that has been used in the records, yes.
And was it mentioned in some of these records that we're talking about that she did suffer from distractions, inability to focus or concentrate?
Yes, there were some notations of those concerns as well.
Was it such that, in gleaning through the records, analyzing them, that she had auditory or visual hallucinations on occasion?
Yes, and most specifically that first admission to Bellin, as well as the admission to the Nicolay Psychiatric Center, where I saw the hallucinations mentioned.
Was that mentioned in 2021?
Yes, upon her admission to
Ooh, she just gave us a little eyebrow raise right there.
Nicolay when she had heavily been abusing methamphetamine recently.
You've been a doctor for some time. You've got a PhD. You've had a lot of education. You've had experience with different kinds of patients, correct?
Yes, many, many different kinds.
With all different sorts of problems, correct?
Yes.
And you've dealt with people who have had drug addictions and things of that sort, correct?
Yes.
You've gone to seminars with regards to how substances can affect the brain, correct?
Yes, and I taught an undergraduate course regarding the effect of substances on psychology as well.
Okay. And would it be fair to say that substances can impact the brain, can cause organic brain damage?
I would say there can certainly cause some functional abnormalities in the brain, although the notion that drug use permanently damages the brain really is not consistently bore out in the literature the way that it is in kind of the public conception of drug use.
Really?
Drug use can also exacerbate mental health problems, correct?
It can exacerbate them or cause them of their own accord, yes.
Drug usage?
Certainly if there has been recent and especially significant drug use, yes, that can affect various neurocognitive capacities, including memory functioning.
How about traumatic events like loss of a mother?
I would say that can cause some difficulties with concentration, though typically would not cause amnesia in and of itself.
Is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is that a mental health condition?
Yes, it is.
Can that get worse over time if untreated?
It can, yes.
If someone has a mood disorder, is that a mental health issue?
Yes.
It's a mental defect or a mental disease?
I would say it could meet criteria as a mental disease or defect according to Wisconsin state statutes, yes.
And can that get worse over time, the mood disorder, if it's left untreated?
It can, yes.
People are not subjected to a civil commitment order unless they have a mental health condition, correct? Is that fair?
It would require a clinician to opine that they have a mental illness, yes.
I saw some records in Brown County, I believe it relates to the Nicolay Psychiatric Center records, that there was a problem addressed, risk for self-injury related to delusional thought process vague. Do you know what that references to?
I believe I recall seeing that verbiage in the records, but I wouldn't be able to supply context without reviewing those records.
Do you know if Ms. Schabusiness had problems or issues with a delusional thought process?
At that time, it was noted that that was a symptom she was displaying upon admission to the facility, yes.
Did you have occasion to, when you met with her, to observe that she had a tangential thought disorder?
During my meetings with the defendant,
Yes.
I did not note signs of a clinically significant thought disorder, no.
How about, was that bore out with Dr. Engine or Dr. Collins?
I would say there was, again, no indications of clinically significant impairment in maintaining linear thought during those evaluations.
Psychiatric Center. Did it have references to Ms. Schabusiness
Misha business.
identifying demons in her life?
In terms of the Nicolay psychiatric records?
Yes.
I do believe there was mention of some commentary of that sort, yes.
And was there commentary that her affect appeared to be labile and inappropriate throughout group, and that she had mood changes and inappropriate facial expressions or laughing?
Yes, I did see that bore out on those records.
Did you see that when you talked with her in November of 2022 or July of
I like this
year?
question.
I did note that there were some moments of some inappropriate grinning or perhaps very brief isolated instances of laughter, although those were short-lived and did not impair capacity for us to have a linear and meaningful discussion.
In July, when you met with her, you said 90 minutes, give or take. Was it cut off for any reason? Was your interview cut off?
No, they were able to be completed on both occasions to their natural course.
Okay. In some of the records, did you note that it indicated her affect was flat when approached?
Yes, there were some indications of a relatively flat or diminished expression in her emotional presentation, yes.
What does that stem from, do you know?
That's, again, something that can have manifold causes and could simply be someone's baseline emotional presentation as well.
Could it be related to a mental health defect or disease?
It is possible, although, again, it could also be due to many other factors.
Also in these progress notes, did you indicate, or did you review, excuse me, that
Is he
she
from New
was
York
feeling
City?
as though different bodies were going in and out of her person?
I do believe I read that in the Nicolay notes as well, yes.
Did she talk about having pressure in her head or having her head hurt?
Yes, that is a complaint that she has made at different occasions across time, yes.
And did she also indicate that she had problems with eye twitching and that her PTSD was triggered from loud noises?
I do believe I recall seeing those symptoms mentioned in the records as well.
Did you, at least in some of either the jail records or the Brown County records from Nicolay, that she talked about wanting to die and go to heaven to see her mom?
Yes, I do recall seeing such comments made.
And in reviewing these records, because there were a lot of them, did she indicate, at least in the records when she was at Brown County at Nicolay, that she was hearing voices that would get heavier at night?
I do believe, yes, there was a pattern of time of day seeming to impact symptoms at that time, yes.
And the time of day would be more at night, they'd be more pronounced at night than the daytime?
Per my recollection of the records, I do believe that was the pattern that was mentioned.
And she was encouraged to connect with a dual therapist to address mental health and her AODA issues. Is that fair?
Yeah, consistently over time, she has been referred for substance abuse treatment, yes.
And in those records from Nicolay, it also talked about that she would have racing thoughts that would get overwhelmed and that she'd hear voices in her head.
Yes, those are symptoms I do recall seeing in the records.
I wonder if Sarah Boone would have liked this lawyer. Oh, yeah. Congrats, Paul.
And it's true, right, that there were discussions about her getting this Aristata injection every 4 weeks to help her?
Yes, that is the typical course in which that medication is administered, and from my recollection, I do believe that's what was ultimately prescribed.
Then there was some discussion about whether she would take the pill or take the injection, correct?
Yes, I do believe that the means of administration was discussed amongst our clinical team.
Even in the notes, it talked about, in the notes from Brown County, from Nicolay Psychiatric Center, it talked about how Ms. Schabusiness would have agitation, anxiety, correct?
Yes.
And that there was a discussion about giving her a Haldol, correct?
Yes, that would be another antipsychotic medication with pretty heavily sedative properties.
Do you know if that was ever given to her?
I would again have to refresh my recollection with the records.
And even in the Nicolay records, it talked about that it was a struggle to decipher what is a genuine psychiatric symptom and what is otherwise talked about as gaminess, correct?
Yes, I do believe that was a term that was employed in the records.
There were just a lot of records to review, and you have a good memory. But you also talked about Zoloft, correct?
He does have good memory.
Yes, that was mentioned specifically in her adolescent treatment records.
And Ms. Schabusiness,
I think this guy's got like photographic memory or something. Jesus. He talks like a textbook. Whew. I think he only mentioned it once where he like might need to refresh his memory by looking at his notes. For the most, he's just like, I know everything. Let's go.
this was given
Hey,
apparently at
Madison.
Nicolay, from what you reviewed in these notes. What are her coping skills, and what does she want to do to make progress with mental health? Is that
I haven't
fair?
heard anything about head
I don't
injuries.
recall that specific information.
With regards to Dr. Lighton, she says that she believes that my client, Ms. Schabusiness, qualifies for the NGI plea based on a diagnosis of a serious mental disorder. You understand that?
Yes, that's what she wrote in her report.
And she opines that her serious mental disorder affected Ms. Schabusiness's ability to know right from wrong at the time of the offense, correct?
I would say it was relatively tersely worded, although that was what was suggested, yes.
And she also said that it affected her ability to control her behaviors. Is that fair?
Yes, that was the opinion that she reached.
Okay, that was a
You have
jab.
a diabolically opposed opinion compared to Dr. Lighton, correct?
Again, I did not opine on the NGI issue.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Nothing further.
Redirect. Just briefly, I think you were asked a great deal again about the records from Nicolay and the specific symptoms that were manifesting at that time at Nicolay. And do you know if Nicolay actually administered a blood test to determine whether or not there were substances in her system at the time she entered Nicolay?
There was either urine or blood screening performed for toxicology purposes, yes.
And she did test positive for methamphetamine?
It was methamphetamine and I believe also amphetamines and THC as well.
And did the Nicolay records show a marked improvement in her symptoms in the 3-week stay there?
Yes, there was a relatively linear trend over time towards psychiatric stability.
And while that might potentially be attributed to taking psychiatric medications, it might also be attributed to
Judge just looked
weaning
over
off
at Taylor
of the illicit
Schabusiness.
substances.
I would say it's fundamentally impossible to
The judge is just distracted for a second
While
there.
that might potentially be attributed to taking psychiatric medications, it might also be attributed to weaning off of the illicit substances.
I would say it's fundamentally impossible to disentangle to what extent precisely the improvement would have derived from those sources.
And you were asked questions about at points in time, did Ms. Schabusiness have potentially paranoia or hallucinations or things that could potentially be associated with psychiatric conditions or psychosis? Did anyone in any of the records that you saw make such an opinion on or around February 22nd and 23rd of 2022?
In terms of those symptoms or diagnoses applying at the time of the alleged misconduct?
Correct.
I would say that from what I saw, Dr. Lighton was the only one that...
You just kicked my
and again,
camera,
it wasn't
sir.
really directly discussed, so at least seemed to imply that those symptoms were at play at the time of the incident.
Now, none of the mental health records that you saw were from February of 2022, is that correct?
I did not see any indication of her being actively involved in psychiatric treatment, so there was no reliable collateral source to corroborate those symptoms at that time.
And again, just to clarify, I think you've done a good job of this, but you were not asked to opine on the issue of whether or not an NGI offense or an NGI defense is appropriate for Ms. Schabusiness in this case.
That is correct. I was only ordered as a competency examiner.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
On those topics, Mr. Freilich?
No, Your Honor. Thank you, Dr.
Thank
Slayton.
Doctor. You can step down.
Damn, that was a pretty darn good expert witness. Just answered the question straight up.
State's next witness?
And wasn't like sleepy to listen to.
State calls Christina Engine.
Yeah, that was Shiro. Shiro's been sleeping behind my wall. It's like between the wall and my computer. It's like a little sliver. And the thing is, he's like right next to my computer, so all the hot air is blowing at him. But he's scared of the flies, you know, because they're like buzzing around his big old ears. And I try to kill them, but there's this one fly that's like fuckering around. I can't kill it. I can't find it. Okay, who's next? I think we have another. Oh, Christina Engine. Oh, I think was Dr. Engine the one that administered the MMPI? Possibly. All right, here we go. Another psychologist. Wait, let's get up and stretch. Oh, yeah, she's 25 years old. Born 1997. Oh.
Engen, Christianaengen.
Mr. Saunders, the witness is yours.
All right, Doctor, how are you employed?
As a psychologist with behavioral consultants,
And how long have you been employed with behavioral consultants?
12 years.
And do you have any degrees?
I do. I have a PhD in counseling psychology from UW-Madison, which I earned in 2010.
All right. And I guess what do you do as a psychologist with behavioral consultants?
I conduct almost exclusively criminal forensic evaluations.
And we've heard that term a few times. What is forensic evaluations? What does that mean?
The court principals will approach a psychologist with a psycholegal question, so a psychological question that applies to the legal situation, and our job is to help answer that and to provide information to the trier of fact, the judge or the jury, to help them answer that question.
Are some of those evaluations that you're asked to conduct what are referred to as NGI evaluations?
Yes.
And I guess what does NGI refer to?
It's for the plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect. It's an evaluation of criminal responsibility.
And you have performed those evaluations in the past?
Yes.
Are you able to approximate how many NGI evaluations you've completed in your career?
Like her
Over the course
outfit?
of 12 years, approximately 250 NGI evaluations.
And are those typically done at the request of a court?
Yes.
Have you, in your career, in those 250 evaluations, reached an opinion that somebody would be appropriate for an NGI plea?
Yes.
And contrary, have you formed the opinion that they are not, they don't fit for the NGI plea?
Yes.
All right. And Dr.
Yeah, she had the like bold makeup.
Do you maintain a
Like the Jersey Shore
curriculum
makeup or
detailed with respect
something.
to your educational background and qualifications?
Yes.
All right. Showing us the mark exhibit 12. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is that?
It is my curriculum vitae.
Does that appear to be up to date?
Yes,
All right. That's a document that you prepared?
it is.
I'd move 12.
Any objection? No objection. 12 will be received.
Psychology in the state of Wisconsin.
And are you also board certified?
I am.
What does that mean?
I'm board certified by the American Board of Professional Psychology. Applicants can specialize in several different areas of psychology. My area of specialty is forensic psychology.
And do you maintain any professional memberships?
Yes.
And what are some of those?
With the
Oh, we're already
American
doing closing arguments.
Psychological Association and the Wisconsin Psychological Association.
In addition to your employment, do you also, or have you had any teaching experience in this role?
Yes.
All right. What are some of those?
I've provided guest lectures for Marquette Law School, for trainees at Mendota Mental Health Institute, once for the Department of Correction psychologists.
Doctor, then I want to ask you about this case. Did you become
Oh, dude, and what's even crazier, like, in my opinion, I think it's the fucking filters, man. Oh my God. I know some like really pretty girls that are like super fucking pretty, but then like when I see their pictures on Instagram, I'm like, bitch, this ain't you. Like, I don't know why, but they like super filter their face. They do the thing where it's like they make their head bump a little bit higher or something, make their forehead bigger, make their eyes really like nice and large, and then you do like the V-shape thing. Like, I don't know, it's so much, but they look so different. I'm like, you're really pretty. Like, you don't need the filters. Makeup, I understand. You know, people like makeup and stuff, but the filters are like, oh, I don't know, that shit's fucking creepy as hell.
or asked to become involved in an NGI evaluation of Taylor Schabusiness?
Yes.
And how did you become involved in that?
I was court ordered to conduct an NGI evaluation.
Were you retained by the state of Wisconsin?
Appointed by the court.
By the court, but not the district attorney's office?
Correct.
And you weren't retained by the defense either?
Correct.
And it's the case that most of the evaluations you perform are at the request of the court?
That is correct.
And did you ultimately prepare a report with respect to your findings regarding that NGI evaluation?
Yes.
I'm showing you Exhibit 13. Move 13. Objection.
So a meeting with Ms. Schabusiness. I also conducted a full discovery review, so review of all of the police reports, videos, documents of that. And then I also, in this case, reviewed her available medical records, which included a prior competency evaluation, records generated through Brown County, and then in this case, I did administer psychological testing.
Okay. So I want to first start with the clinical interview that you mentioned conducting. What date was the date that you met with Ms. Schabusiness?
So I attempted to meet with her first on October 12, 2022. However, because of her security status in the jail.
What is it? Weird golden filter that makes her look like C3PO? What is C3PO? Like a fucking Star Wars character or something?
I was not able to meet with her confidentially. So I returned on October 21, 2022, and we met in a conference room. That's when I conducted the interview.
Oh, it's an actor.
And psychological testing.
Oh, yeah, C3PO. Oh, it is. It's the Star Wars robot, the gold one. Oh, my God.
And October 21st, 2022, would that have been about 8 months after the offense that she was charged with?
Yes.
Okay. And you also mentioned you conducted a full discovery review, and that included reviewing videos. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Was one of those interviews that you reviewed an interview of Ms. Schabusiness from February 23rd of 2022?
Yes.
Was that a rather lengthy interview?
It was.
Did you review the entirety of it?
To the best of my recollection, I believe that I reviewed the vast majority of it. If I would say the majority of it.
All right. Were there a lot of dead parts in the middle of it?
There were, but I thought it was important to review that video footage to listen for comments that Ms. Schabusiness would have made in the room by herself to observe her behaviors and the like.
So it wasn't just the comments that were made to law enforcement that you were looking for, but also her independent behaviors?
Correct.
And you also mentioned you reviewed the police reports and other various attachments that were part of the case?
Yes.
The medical records that you reviewed, you mentioned their prior competency evaluations, but also Brown County Health Services records. Is that right?
Correct.
Was that in reference to a stay at Nicolay Psychiatric?
Correct.
All right. And when was that?
That spanned March of 2021 to April 2021.
All right. And you then indicated you also conducted a, I guess, personality test, or what was the fourth collateral source you reviewed?
I administered an objective personality test. It's called the Minnesota Multiphasic
Oh, she froze.
Personality Inventory, 3rd edition. The acronym is MMPI-3.
Wouldn't she have
So I
understood
want to
this?
then go through your report, if that's okay, Doctor. Beginning on page 2. So one of the things you start with is called relevant history. You see that section of the report?
Yes.
And I guess why is it important to review the history as part of your NGI evaluation?
When gathering history about a defendant, we are touching on topics that are potentially relevant to the issue of criminal responsibility. Things like early childhood events, history of mental health treatment, substance use, any learning difficulties, difficulty working, all of this can potentially inform the issue of criminal responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah, I was
And,
surprised
as
to
part
see
of
that she was able
did
to
you
hold her
review,
jobs.
Ms. Schabusiness's employment history?
Yes.
And I guess what did you note with respect to her employment history?
What I recall is that she has worked primarily in factory settings. Relevant to this evaluation was that she was working up until about a week before the underlying offenses.
Why is one's employment history relevant to an NGI evaluation?
It speaks to the prong of behavioral control. So later on, when we discuss the prongs of the NGI plea, one of them has to do with one's ability to conform their behavior with the requirements of the law. It's a capacity issue, so can a person do that under normal circumstances? And one's ability to work, maintain employment, show up, perform their job duties, that speaks to an individual's capacity to conform their behavior and meet the demands of daily living.
And you noted employment history fairly consistently up to about, I think you said, a week before the offense?
Correct.
And you also reviewed Ms. Schabusiness's mental health history as well?
Yes.
As we talked about. As well, did you review her, during the course of your clinical interview with Ms. Schabusiness, her current presentation?
Yes.
And I guess what is the importance of kind of noting, as you do, the current clinical presentation of a patient?
So that's another piece of information that informs the diagnosis that is required of the evaluation.
Okay. As part of the clinical interview with Ms. Schabusiness, do you get a narrative from her about the alleged offense?
To the extent that I was able, I did. Ms. Schabusiness recalled the time period leading up to the offenses, but then she reported that she had no memory for the offenses themselves, and she did not. She reported she did not regain memory until after her arrest.
Okay. With
Wait,
respect
really?
to Ms. Schabusiness recalling the time period leading up
Because I remember she said she blacked out, but like, I don't know. I feel like they didn't really dive into that. So I was like really confused. Did she say she blacked out when she was doing it or what? But so she's saying that she blacked out, but until she got arrested, she remembered what happened.
to the offense. What sort of information did she provide?
What I learned was that she had been living in Texas.
That's the
and returned
that's the
to
tweet that I found.
Wisconsin, in early 2022 to tend to legal matters. She made a court appearance. I believe she was sentenced to 5 years probation. She was making arrangements to have her community supervision transferred to Texas so that she could resume caring for her newborn baby, who was in the care of her grandparents. She was working. She had started Suboxone treatment to maintain sobriety, and I understand that she struggled during this time period, was feeling what sounded like to me some alienation in the workplace, not feeling like she was connecting with her coworkers, and then began to, she reported to me she was hearing voices that were telling her to relapse on methamphetamine.
Okay. And some of those, you mentioned, employment, you mentioned some arrangements with respect to childcare. Why are some of those acts kind of relevant from an NGI evaluation standpoint?
Again, it speaks to the issue of one's capacity to conform their behavior. So all of those are very goal-directed tasks.
And those are all kind of leading up to the date of the offense.
Correct.
With respect to February 21st, 2022 specifically, did she have a narrative about sort of the timeline of events leading up to the offense?
Yes, on February 21st, 2022, she recalled that she was socializing with friends. They had come to the residence she was staying in.
Sure,
I
click
believe
my
they
camera.
were smoking marijuana. She expressed an interest in finding methamphetamine, and so she said that she went on a, quote, meth hunt, unquote.
And did she indicate whether she had ingested methamphetamine leading up to the homicide?
Yes, she told me that she took 52 hits of methamphetamine.
And did she also refer to that amount as, quote, a lot?
Yes.
All right.
Jeez.
And did she indicate at some point that night meeting up with the crime victim, Mr. Therian?
Yes.
And then you indicated around the time of the
What's
alleged
for dinner
offense,
today?
She reported having no memory of that time.
Correct.
Did she, and then you indicated she regained her memory sort of in speaking with law enforcement.
Yes.
Was that professed amnesia of a concern to you?
It was notable. As I indicated in my report, I found her self-reported amnesia to be inconsistent with my review of the discovery material. So specifically, I observed her describe in great detail to the detective the details of that evening. So that stands in contrast to her self-reported amnesia in the present or at the time of the October interview.
You also indicated during the interview with Ms. Schabusiness you performed some psychological testing, is that right?
Yes.
What testing did you administer?
It was the MMPI-3.
What is the MMPI-3?
It's a very well-established psychological instrument dating back to the 1940s, very well researched and respected. So this test can provide indication of different types of psychopathology or different types of mental illness. It also contains a number of validity indices to help psychologists understand the response style of the test taker.
So the validity indices, I think I said that right, that you mentioned, I guess, what does that mean?
What that means is that built into the test are several items that, when they're all combined at the end, they'll indicate if a person is answering questions in a forthright manner, if they're minimizing their symptoms, or potentially if they're exaggerating their symptoms.
So is this test like a true-false questions, or how does the test administered?
Correct. It's a true-false instrument.
And I guess what were some of your findings with respect to Ms. Schabusiness's performance on the MMPI test?
Well, first, let me be clear that the test does not say anything about Ms. Schabusiness's functioning in February of 2022. It only provides information about her functioning at the time of the test. So what was relevant from that was that there was indication of symptom exaggeration. She responded to items, she endorsed a number of symptoms that genuine individuals with genuine mental illness would not endorse. The frequency, number of unusual symptoms that she acknowledged was greater than those with genuine mental illness. And then there was also indication of non-credible memory impairment built into those, the results of those validity indices.
Non-credible and
So I just
memory
want to go back a little
impairment?
bit. And that's a good point. So this testing is sort of in the moment as you're meeting with Ms. Schabusiness, is that right?
Correct.
But why is it still something you administer in the course of an NGI evaluation?
So getting back to that term of response style, that's very important to understand if the individual is being forthright in their account of information that they provide to me. And what I found with these elevated indices indicating the exaggerated descriptions of mental illness, unusual descriptions of mental illness, is that the information that was being reported to me needed to be interpreted with caution. Ms. Schabusiness's self-report could not be taken at face value.
And I think you state that anything that's not objectively observed should be closely scrutinized. Is that right?
Correct. So then it would be important to find other sources of information that would support what she's telling me versus relying just exclusively on her self-report.
And one of the phrases you used was endorsed symptoms. What does that mean?
For example, I'm just making this test example up, but I feel depressed. A true response would be an endorsement of that symptom.
So an endorsement is something somebody's telling you.
Yes.
All right. So based on the interview you had with Ms. Schabusiness, your review of some of those collateral sources of information, were you able to offer an opinion with respect to whether Ms. Schabusiness was suffering from a mental disease or defect?
Yes.
And what was, I guess, that opinion?
I reached the opinion that while she did have a mental health conditions, these did not appear to qualify as mental diseases and defects.
In your report, you outlined, I guess, 3 mental health conditions. Is that right?
Correct.
What are those?
The diagnoses that I offered were methamphetamine-related use disorder, and that was applied in acknowledgement of Ms. Schabusiness's general use of methamphetamine in that time period. The diagnosis of methamphetamine intoxication was applied because she was using methamphetamine at the time of the crime. And then the final diagnosis I gave was methamphetamine-induced psychotic disorder, and I offered that one because Ms. Schabusiness was describing, and the records contained indication of paranoia. I think she made a comment about muscle rebuilding during the homicide, and this indicated to me the presence of psychotic symptoms, which I attributed to the recent methamphetamine use.
So, and that's a question I have. So mental health conditions, in your opinion, are different from mental diseases or defect?
Correct.
And the 3 diagnoses you offered, you stated those are not mental diseases or defects.
That is my understanding.
And why is that?
Because, excuse me. So if one ingests an intoxicant voluntarily, so they took it of their own volition, and if they were not naive to its effects, that would mean it's my understanding, based on the case law, that the defendant would be subsequently responsible for all alterations of thinking, judgment, behavior related to that intoxication.
I guess, were you aware of any information in the materials you reviewed that Ms. Schabusiness's methamphetamine use was anything but voluntary?
No.
And that obviously she reported a history of using methamphetamine to you?
Yes.
So I guess, were you aware of any information in the materials you reviewed that Ms. Schabusiness's methamphetamine use was anything but voluntary?
No.
And that obviously she reported a history of using methamphetamine to you?
Yes.
So I guess, were you of the opinion that she was not naive to its effect?
Correct. Yes. And I'm also aware that she had psychotic symptoms in the context of methamphetamine use the year prior. So certainly she was aware of its effects, broadly speaking, to include psychosis.
So I want to pause just here. Methamphetamine use in general, I guess, in your experience and your education training, are you aware of some of the symptoms that may manifest as a result of that?
Yes.
What are some of those?
Excessive energy, decreased need for sleep, and then oftentimes we see in the field of forensic psychology that it can induce psychotic symptoms, so misperceptions of reality, and paranoia.
You also mentioned a year prior there was a diagnosis of at the Nicolay Psychiatric Center. Is that right?
Yes,
And did you consider, I guess, the applicability or the appropriateness of a bipolar I disorder?
I did.
And what was your conclusion with respect to that propriety of that diagnosis?
After considering the diagnosis of bipolar I disorder, I did rule it out because I am aware that being intoxicated or having a methamphetamine-induced psychosis can look virtually similar or indistinguishable from a manic episode with psychosis. So the two look similar. And so what I would be looking for if I were to support a bipolar I disorder diagnosis is the presence of that psychosis and the mood elevation when there's no methamphetamine use present.
And are you aware of any of those symptoms absent in the context of methamphetamine use?
I'm not aware of a time ever that Ms. Schabusiness displayed psychotic symptoms or elevated mood outside of the methamphetamine use.
Yes, you are aware, though, that bipolar I diagnosis was applied to Ms. Schabusiness in April of 2021.
Yes.
Are you aware, though, that there was concerns about recent methamphetamine use around that same time?
Yes, I believe that she tested positive for several drugs, including methamphetamine at that time.
So that's why that's not a diagnosis you are willing to give to Ms. Schabusiness.
Objection leading.
Just clarifying the testimony. I'm just clarifying the testimony.
Overruled.
Thank you. So I guess in sum then, is there any mental disease or defect that you would diagnose Ms. Schabusiness with?
Yes, also offered at Nicolay, or Nicolette, I'm not sure the pronunciation. There was a diagnosis of, I believe it was polysubstance abuse or something to that effect, meaning multiple substances were being abused at that time. I believe that's an appropriate diagnosis for her. I do believe I believe firmly in the diagnoses that I offered in my report.
Okay. But those are not diagnoses that I guess are mental diseases or defect?
Correct.
Okay. Did you also then reach an opinion with respect to the second question or the second part of the NGI evaluation, whether she was responsible for the conduct?
Yes.
Okay, and what was that opinion?
I found insufficient support for the conclusion that as a result of a mental disease or defect that she either A, was unable to conform her behavior to the requirements of the law, or B, was unable to appreciate the wrongfulness of her conduct.
What are some of the reasons you reached that conclusion?
Well, first, and most importantly, I was not able to find support for a diagnosis that would qualify as a mental disease or defect. So really, at that point, then the analysis could end. That's a requirement of the plea. But I found in my report, I outlined various different factors, but focusing on the two issues, one's ability to conform their behavior to the requirements of the law and one's ability to appreciate wrongfulness. First of all, I did pull from her behavior outside of the moments of her known intoxication to observe that she was able to engage in very goal-directed behavior. So I assumed that any alterations in her behavioral control were directly related to the methamphetamine use. So that was the first issue. And the second issue having to do with wrongfulness, it was my opinion that she did demonstrate appreciation of wrongfulness. There were several comments that were made to law enforcement expressing apologies to the victim's sister, indication that she was trying to conceal the body was dismembered because she wanted to conceal it. These all speak to awareness of consequences, appreciation of wrongfulness, that she grasped wrongdoing had occurred.
And did you also consider, the...
Damn, I thought the defense's psychologists are pretty okay, but I feel like the last two, I don't know. Oh, man, they're slam dunking.
validity of the professed amnesia for the time surrounding the offense?
Yes, I did not find the self-reported amnesia to be credible. First of all, there was that disconnect between what she was reporting to me in the interview as compared to the recollection she had during an interview with the detective immediately thereafter. And then I also found indication in the results of the MMPI-3 that she was not, that she was reporting non-credible memory impairment.
At time, have you had the chance to review any other NGI evaluations conducted in this case?
Yes.
And who authored those reports?
Diane Litton?
Okay. And in your review of Dr. Litton's report, did any of her findings or conclusions alter your opinion from November of 2022?
No.
I guess the same opinions you're testifying here to today?
It did not alter my opinion.
And then all of the opinions that you're offering here today, are they to a reasonable degree of professional certainty?
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor. Nothing further on.
Cross-examination, Mr. Freilich.
Robert, would you be able to take a break right now or not?
Okay, ladies and gentlemen,
I like how Mr. Froelich is always making sure we're taking breaks. Thank you, Mr. Froelich.
we'll take a 10-minute break and we'll resume. All rise for the jury.
Cross-examination.
No. Okay. Very good. I'll add that one word in, and then we'll discuss the order of the instruction appropriate for how the evidence is.
Wait, wait, what? No cross-examination? Hold on. Did I go too forward? Get up and stretch. Drink some water. Hydrate. Ooh. Listen, you have back, shoulder, anything issues? Get up and stretch.
Before we bring the jury out, just briefly, I've had distributed to you a set of instructions. And
Oh, never mind. It's jury instructions. Okay. Wait for the jury to come back. Come on, jury.
Is that part of the Wisconsin Forensic Unit?
Wisconsin Forensic Unit is a division of behavioral consultants.
Okay. And with regards to this case, you did not do a competency evaluation. You did an NGI evaluation?
Correct.
You met with...
Yeah, so interesting thing that I thought from her testimony was mental condition is different than mental disease or defect. If you ingest intoxication of your own volition, your defendant is responsible for all these alterations that happen to you. So you're responsible for your actions. Use of previous meth, so she's not naive of its effects. Meth-induced psychosis, that's what she thinks happened. It looks like manic episode with psychosis, but like she was able to differentiate that it was like meth-induced psychosis. And then she agreed with the diagnosis of polysubstance abuse.
With
not the bipolar
Taylor
one.
Schabusiness, correct?
Yes.
You recognize her here?
I do.
Taylor Schabusiness.
Ma'am, you met with her at the Brown County Jail on October 12th and October 21st of 2022?
Yes.
Have you met with her since?
No.
So is it fair to say that it's been about 9 months since you've seen her, correct?
Yes.
The first time that you tried to see her, there was some sort of a security issue going on and you were not allowed to see her, is that correct?
I was allowed to see her, but only cell side, and I thought that would be inappropriate to conduct an interview cell side.
Okay. As far as the things that you did to put your report together, you relied on the two clinical contacts on October 12th and October 21st of 2022? correct?
Yes.
You administered the MMPI, the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory 3, correct?
Yes.
I see that number changes oftentimes. Has it changed?
Actually, I can't recall how long it was the MMPI 2, but it was that edition for several decades, and the MMPI 3 was based on 2017 population estimates, so it's a relatively recent edition.
And it gets updated and upgraded every few years. Is that fair?
No, it was many decades before it was updated.
Okay. And it's essentially a true-false test?
That's the response format. It's more complicated than that.
Okay. What kind of questions are on this MMPI?
So I provided, an example that I made up, but there's various statements, and the respondent is asked to respond true or false if they agree or mostly agree with the statement, or disagree or mostly disagree with the statement.
Strongly disagree?
I can't recall the test instructions, but something to that effect.
Do people that have, education issues or lack of education, do they struggle with the MMPI?
There is a reading level that's required to administer the MMPI. I don't recall it off the top of my head.
How many questions are on the MMPI?
About 335.
Okay. How long does it take to get through the test?
In the case of Ms. Schabusiness, I believe it was completed within about 90 minutes, maybe an hour and 45 minutes.
Sometimes longer if you have difficulty reading?
Could be.
So that was done. You reviewed some police reports in this case?
Yes.
A criminal complaint and some video footage, is that fair?
Yes.
Photographs?
Yes.
Oh, I thought he was
How do
going
you
to
get
go
that
somewhere with that, no?
It was provided as part of the entire file. That standard, it comes along when we receive a referral for an NGI evaluation.
Was it sent to you by the district attorney's
I thought he was going to say she has like reading comprehension issues or something.
office?
My office would have taken care of that. I received it from my office.
Maybe he was just trying to
And
hint
then
it.
you looked up some information on CCAP, the Circuit Court Access Program?
Yes.
Basically a search on the internet of her background?
Correct.
Specifically her prior record?
Yes.
And then you looked at some Brown County Human Services records?
Yes.
Would that be the Nicolay Psychiatric Center records?
Yes.
Okay. So you looked at those?
Yes.
And then you looked at some jail records?
I did not. I requested the jail records, but they had not been received.
And was there a request to see some Purveya Health records?
Yes.
Did you get to see those?
No.
Okay. Did you review any Bellin Health records?
No.
Was it your understanding that Taylor Schabusiness had some treatment stays at Bellin Health in the past?
Yes, I understood that she attempted suicide at age 14, resulting in the admission to Bellin.
And what about at Purveya? Was it your understanding that she had gone there for some mental health treatment as well?
Yes, outpatient treatment.
Okay. So you were missing the Bellin records and the Purveya records, correct?
Correct.
Now, you got some relevant history, some background information about my client, correct?
Yes.
You found out that she was born in Chicago, correct?
Yes.
She was raised in Lindenhurst, Illinois, is that fair?
Yes.
And then she moved to Green Bay in 2009 at maybe age 11?
Yes.
And that same year her mother passed away?
Yes.
Was it your understanding that her mother died in the house when she was there?
I don't know those details.
Was it your understanding then that she was raised by her father, Arturo Coronado?
Yes.
Okay.
And then did she also relate to you that she moved to Cotulla, Texas when she was 16 to live with her grandparents?
Yes.
And that she had a series of moves. She lived in Cotulla and Alice, Texas, and Jackson, Mississippi,
Yes.
and then came back to Green Bay?
Yes.
That's kind of the progression, is that fair?
Correct.
You found out that she was also married in February of 2020?
Yes.
Okay.
And when you were involved, had she given birth to her child?
Yes, that was October 2021.
Ultimately, the child went to live with the grandparents, correct?
Yes.
In Texas?
Yes.
Did you garner information that she was in an abusive marriage with her husband?
What I gathered was that she was married. There was discord within the marital relationship, which led Ms. Schabusiness to rekindle her friendship and romance with the victim in this case, and that would have been in 2020. I can't speculate beyond that. The nature of the
interesting.
relationship.
Did you get any information that her husband was hitting her in the head?
Objection
No.
asked and answered. She doesn't know.
Oh, that's a different question.
Overruled.
No.
Okay. So you got some background regarding her life, correct?
Yes.
Did you find out that she went to middle school in Green Bay and went to Bayport High School as well?
I don't recall that specific detail. I know that she graduated high school in Texas.
As part of the educational, assessment, as part of your report, did she report a history of some learning disabilities or difficulties?
She did. She attributed them to a diagnosis of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder.
And was it such that she had some issues with school, suspensions, ultimate expulsion?
Yes, she was expelled, the result of fighting.
2022 report, it's somewhat stale. Is that fair?
I would disagree with that.
It is from last year, though, correct?
Correct.
Nobody gave you any reports from Bellin Health to review, correct?
Correct.
You could have, doctor, upgraded your report by looking at additional records, Bellin Health and the Purveyor records. Is that fair?
Where I left my report, as indicated on the last page, is that I would be happy to receive any additional records that I was unable to obtain, and I would update my report once received if it changed my opinion. I received no additional records after submission of this report.
Your colleague in the field is Dr. Matthew Seipel, correct?
Yes.
And did you confer with him?
Man, could you imagine her and Dr. Seipel like communicating to each other? I don't know. Maybe they're different when they're off the witness stand, but like I just imagine them talking to each other very straightforward, straight face, no emotion.
Him with regards to, your opinions, your assessment, your evaluation?
No.
Did you share any information with him?
I did provide him a copy of my records that I obtained from Brown County at his request, and that's a common practice among evaluators.
Sure. But fair to say that he did not send you, he didn't reciprocate by sending you the Bellin Health records that he had?
No, he did not.
Okay. That is something that could have been done, correct?
If I was not alerted that those were part of our practice, I wouldn't have known to request those, and it's not clear to me that Dr. Seipel would know that I was looking for those. Typically, what will happen is that I will receive additional records from one of the court principals with an indication that they would like a second review of the issue.
Does it surprise you that, as far as Dr. Seipel is concerned, I provided the Bellin Health records to him for his evaluation and that he didn't send them to you?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Does it surprise you that, I sent the Bellin Health records to Dr. Seipel and he didn't send them to you?
That would not surprise
I feel like she could be like, well, why didn't you send it to me then? You could have just sent it to me. Ooh, right back at you.
me because unless he had instruction to provide them to me, that would not be common practice.
Okay. You don't share information then, correct?
Only upon request, if it's appropriate, if it would be appropriate and permissible and specifically requested, but we don't, as a general practice, pass records between doctors.
Okay. If you had received these records, you could have done a supplemental report. Is that fair?
If it changed my opinion, if I felt that it was relevant and added meaningfully to this evaluation, I would have, yes.
Clay Psychiatric Center. You had a chance to look at all those records, correct?
Yes.
And was it your understanding that Taylor Schabusiness was committed and she was sent to that facility for mental health treatment, correct?
Yes.
And you were aware, tell me if you were you aware of an order for civil commitment for her?
I was not.
Okay. Had you ever been made aware that she was under an order to take psychotropic medications?
No.
If I told you that she was civilly committed in April of 2021, where the court of law, determined that she was mentally ill, would that cause you to have any concerns?
It would certainly be relevant, but it does fit with the information I already had that Ms. Schabusiness was discharged from that facility to outpatient treatment with the goal of receiving substance use treatment.
And did you know when she was at the Nicolay Psychiatric Center that she was under an order to take medication?
No.
Did you know that she was required to take antipsychotic medication?
Yes, I was aware that she was prescribed Abilify, an antipsychotic.
Injectable antipsychotic?
Initially oral, later injectable.
Now, during your 2 contacts with her in October of 2022, did you get a sense that she was suffering from any kind of auditory or other hallucinations?
She reported that to me, but her behavioral presentation to me was inconsistent with her self-report. And the quality of her self-report was not consistent with genuine psychosis.
So I guess the reason why we have 2 psychologists right now that are testifying is because the other guy, Dr. Seipel, I guess he was the one that determined competency. And then she's the one that determines the NGI evaluation thing, whether or not it's like not guilty by reason of insanity.
Did
Right?
you
What
gain
happened,
any
right?
information that she was suffering from a mood disorder when you met with her?
Oh my God, the cross-examination is always such a snooze with this guy.
Her emotional expression was odd when I met with her, but I would. She did not present as acutely depressed or hypomanic, let alone manic. So I wasn't seeing significant indication of a major mood disorder.
You did see in the Nicolay records that there was a diagnosis for her of bipolar 1, correct?
Yes.
With psychotic features, is that correct?
I don't recall that qualifier, but certainly the record does indicate that she was experiencing psychotic symptoms at that time.
That was
And
2021.
That is a qualifiable mental disease or mental defect, correct?
Yes.
Do you agree that if someone has an underlying mental health disorder, that using or abusing drugs can exacerbate that mental health disease or defect or condition?
I would agree with that statement.
Whatever topics of discussion.
Where I found that she provided a sufficiently detailed history, where she was lacking was when I asked her to describe her recollection of the underlying offenses.
Did you note her to have memory loss or memory impairment?
I did not, aside from that self-reported amnesia, I did not detect memory loss.
How much time did you spend with her on October 12th of 2022? Do you know?
I would estimate about 15 minutes.
15?
Yes.
Okay. And then, doctor, on October 21st, 2022, how much time did you spend with her then?
I can't recall. My best estimate would be about 3 hours, but again, that's 9 months old.
Long time ago, right?
9 months, yes.
Do you agree?
It does have that potential.
And how about adolescent long-term marijuana use? Same thing?
I'm less certain about that.
Certainly, if you're using heroin or cocaine or drugs like that, that can cause brain damage as well.
Yes.
And that she exhibited some psychotic symptoms, is that fair?
No.
Recommendation for her to be on Haldol?
No. And then to be clear with your last question, I did not personally observe psychotic symptoms during the moments of my evaluation of Ms. Schabusiness, but I did see in the record indication of past psychotic symptoms, to be clear.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Did you see in the records there was a recommendation for her to be on Haldol?
No, I don't recall that.
Dr. Seipel was asked to opine on the competency issue, correct?
That is correct.
We're not talking about competency, we're talking about NGI. Is that fair?
Yes.
The entire report, and you're familiar with Dr. Layton's opinions, correct?
Yes.
And do you agree with her findings?
No. Well, it was authored more recently, but the authoring of the report has little to do with its relevancy because we were both doing an evaluation that was retrospective. So if you're looking at it, my evaluation would be more current than Dr. Layton's because mine was in closer proximity to the alleged offenses. So that's another way to look at it.
But another way to look at it is your, with due respect, your report is lacking because you don't have you haven't reviewed the Bill of Health records, correct?
It is missing that piece of information, but I would like to point out that it's not common for me as an evaluator when I'm looking at an offense that occurred in 2022 to be requesting records from when one was a teenager. Those would not be, they're certainly generally relevant, but they say little about what was going on in 2022.
Did Taylor Schabusiness tell you that she had no memory of the alleged offense?
She did.
When did she tell you that on both dates? October 12th and October 21st?
I did not ask her about the offenses on the first date. I only asked her on the second date, which is when she reported the amnesia.
That was on October 21st of 2022.
Yes.
Did the jury go and did they
And
deliberate
reviewing
yet?
those Nicolay records, it's true that she was hospitalized, correct?
Yes.
For about a month, right?
Jury deliberation? I think they deliberate right now.
Somewhere between a couple of weeks and a month.
Okay. And that she was prescribed
Do you think their deliberation today is going to be longer than the guilt phase deliberation?
some medication for nightmares?
I believe that she was prescribed Abilify.
And,
I can
go ahead.
refresh my recollection.
Okay.
Sorry,
And
I'm
it was-
skipping around.
Such that when you talked with Taylor Schabusiness that she was actively hearing voices, those were the comments that she made to you?
Yes.
Did she indicate to you that she was hearing voices in her cell?
Yes.
Who were they of?
I think she was less clear. They were very vague. She may have suggested that she was hearing voices of her coworkers, pejorative in nature. She also said that she was hearing a voice saying, "I love you." I don't know who she said was saying, "I love you."
Can you help me with this? What is a manic symptom?
That would be extreme mood elevation, increased goal-directed activity, decreased need for sleep, decreased risk appraisal. Those are some primary characteristics.
Extreme mood, like throwing a chair at a doctor?
What I gather that you're referring to is the evaluation of Dr. Layton of
Yes.
Ms. Schabusiness. I'm hesitant to characterize that as a product of a manic episode.
As far as you understand, it happened out of the blue, correct?
Yes.
Did you have the occasion to review the report from Dr. Tracy Lucetta?
No.
Is a yes or no? You could have gone back to see Ms. Schabusiness after October 21st of 2022. Is that correct?
If you're looking for a yes or no answer, I'm not able to answer that in a yes or no fashion.
The fact is you didn't, correct?
That is correct.
Did you see, when you met with her in October, did you see her use odd or unusual facial expressions?
Hello.
Yes, I believe there were instances of her smiling inappropriately.
That it didn't track or it didn't follow, correct? It was out of context, is that fair?
Yes.
Mr. Saunders.
Doctor, I want to pick up on questions towards the end there.
No, redirect.
You were asked to describe what a manic episode or manic symptoms are. Is that right?
Yes.
With respect to a bipolar 1 diagnosis, one of the requirements is a manic episode, right?
Yes.
And how long do those typically last?
They can last for quite a long time, and then that would be based on my experience that they can last as long as months.
Holy shit! Really?
Oftentimes until treatment is administered.
Oh wow! I thought it was weeks. I didn't know it'd be months.
Criteria sort of requires there to be a week of manic episode. Is that fair?
I would need to look at the DSM, but that would make sense.
All right. So you said that you were hesitant to say the instance of chair throwing was a manic episode. Is that what you said?
Yes.
And can you explain why?
There are many reasons for a person to throw a chair. One of them could be due to a manic episode. But before I would make that conclusion, I would want to have compelling evidence that such a diagnosis is appropriate, and that would need to include objective evidence, meaning observation over time when a person is not being thinking that they're being viewed, things of that nature.
So I guess then would some of that objective evidence be to consider time periods both before and subsequent to the manic episode that you're observing?
Yes.
Why would that be helpful to know?
It would speak to consistency of behavior. There's a lot of information that can be gathered by looking at behavior over time. When is the onset? Does it happen? I mentioned this earlier. Does it happen when people are not being when they do not know that they're being observed? Things like that. And then there's more. The more objective evidence there is, the more credible that diagnosis can be.
So I guess in general, if you're attempting to determine whether somebody's actively having a legitimate manic episode, you sort of look at the time frame both before and after.
Yes.
You were asked some questions about your interactions with Ms. Schabusiness, about her reporting or endorsing that she was hearing voices.
Oh my
You
God,
remember
it's so
those
fucking
questions?
hot in here.
you
Jesus
indicated,
Christ.
Sort of her response to those were sort of vague in terms of what she was experiencing.
Correct.
In your opinion, did that appear to be consistent with genuine psychosis?
No.
Why is that?
To me, my take on them was that they were represented some social anxiety, some rumination, her thinking about her circumstances. They seemed like more of an internal dialogue versus an actual auditory hallucination. Which
Oh, she was
tend
also
to
in
be,
Abilify?
More bizarre. You also will see behavioral indication that a person is responding to internal stimuli or the auditory hallucination. So you'll see indication. Maybe the person won't even say that they are experiencing these voices, but they'll be distracted, have a difficult time completing their thoughts. It's a lot more subtle of an expression than simply saying, "I hear
Oh
voices."
wow,
None of the
damn.
sort of other things you are trained to look for, you observed in Ms. Schabusiness?
Correct.
And in addition, you've already testified to concerns about exaggerating symptoms.
Yes.
Yeah, my mom has a not my mom. My friend's mom also has I always forget what it is. I don't know if it's like a type of schizophrenia or bipolar. Don't remember. But I know that she takes care of her mom, and she's been taking care of her mom since she was like a teenager. And yeah, that shit is like really, really rough, to the point where like I think the mom now lives with her. Like it'd be like on and off whether or not the mom lives with her, you know. But I think now the mom lives with her, and like, yeah, it could still be really tough, especially when they're like alone, and like, you know, they're not taking their medication and stuff like that.
You were asked questions about review of certain records, particularly the Bell and Health records. You were aware that there was a prior attempt of self-harm previous in Ms. Schabusiness' history?
Yes, at age 14.
Okay.
It's one of the
And
medications that Taylor
records
was
from
on.
that age, 10 years or so from prior to the date of the offense that you're attempting to determine here. Do you believe anything in those records would substantially change the opinions you're testifying here to today?
As I know it, there's not anything that would speak specifically to the issue of the NGI plea. But as I indicated, I would have been happy to receive those records if they had been made available to me. I felt, though, that for me, one of the main issues was Ms. Schabusiness's use of methamphetamine at the time of these offenses, and I don't think that information generated 10 years prior would change that. So in sum, no, I do not believe those records would change my opinion.
Okay. And then I'll sort of pick up on the methamphetamine you brought up, because you were asking questions about that, about psychotic symptoms that you had observed in Ms. Schabusiness's records in the past. Is that fair?
Yes.
And are you aware of any of those symptoms that were reported absent the context of methamphetamine use?
No, I am not.
And so concepts like, you know, psychosis or meth-induced psychosis, I think you mentioned, those are as a result of methamphetamine use.
Yes, my review of the record indicates that all of the psychosis observed objectively occurred in the context of methamphetamine use.
Then finally, you were asking questions about the MMPI. I think there was a question about like lack of education and if that can impact that. Is that, you remember that question?
Yes.
All right. Is there any information you're aware of any cognitive deficit for the defendant?
No, my understanding was that she attributed her learning difficulties to ADHD. She did not have an individual education program or IEP that would signify learning deficits, and she has a high school diploma, which indicates she had sufficient reading level to take the MMPI 3.
Thank you, Doctor. Nothing further.
Anything on those topics, Mr. Fraley?
Did she say that she had concentration issues?
I don't recall that.
When you talked to her, she was very quiet, correct?
She was soft-spoken.
Didn't give a lot of information, correct?
It's
I disagree with
reprocessing.
that. I obtained a reasonable history from her.
Okay. It wasn't like she gave one-word answers,
No,
but the responses were short. Is that fair?
no.
Okay. Nothing further.
Anything on that?
No.
Thank you, Dr.
Oh wow, only came out with bumps and bruises.